Chapter 14. The Templeton twins have the best idea of them all. There was not exactly a bang. In fact, it was more like a click. Nothing happened. "I knew it," Abigail said. Cassie had now managed to sink her teeth into a leg of Dean's lovely trousers. The one-man helicoptering man frantically threw the gun aside, grabbed the controls, turned the key, and pressed the button. The overhead rotor started turning. Slowly, Dean rose into the air, with the little white dog still attached to his leg and snarling. Dean shook his leg to get the dog to let go. But one of the famously distinctive things about terriers is they don't let go. "Off! Off! Off!" Dean cried at the ridiculous, tenacious dog. Then he tried to bend down and remove Cassie from his leg. That was when he dropped the document, which fluttered down to the ground like a sheaf of papers falling to the ground. John ran to retrieve the papers. Abigail ran under Dean and the dog and cried, "Cassie, here, cookie, cookie." I see above that I said that terriers don't let go. The precise fact of the matter is they usually don't let go. But a terrier, like most dogs, will do practically anything for a dog biscuit or a cookie. Cassie, believing, ridiculously, that Abigail was offering her a treat, opened her mouth and fell into Abigail's arms. "Finally!" Dean shouted. "And now, goodbye and good riddance." "Wait!" Now it was John's turn to have an idea. Before Dean could speak again or fly off, John called, "What about the battery charger?" Then he said, "Oops!" and clamped his hand to his mouth. Everybody looked at everybody else. "What is he talking about?" Dean asked. "Nothing," John said. He waved at Dean and cried, "Bye! Have a nice flight!" Dean descended a bit and fixed John with a stern, "I'm an adult and you're a child look. What charger?" John shook his head and waved his hands in a manner that suggested he was blabbing on about silly trifles. "Nothing. Forget it. It's at the lab." He looked at this father very intently and said, "Right? Isn't that where the charger is? At the lab?" Professor Templeton opened his mouth to speak, but then gave his son a thoughtful, frowning look and shut it. Abigail, who realized that something was up, put Cassie on the ground and watched her brother with wide eyes. "What battery charger?" Dean demanded. "The problem is the battery," John said. "Isn't that what you've been working on, Papa?" That is, the professor said. "The power source," John said urgently, "that you've been working on?" "Well, yes, but you see, batteries of this scale are so heavy, And then the professor grew silent. He looked at John and seemed to figure something out. Suddenly, he smiled and continued, "In fact, you see, it's quite interesting, really, Mr. Dean. Converting chemical electrical energy of a battery into the kinetic energy of turning blades is a most cumbersome and challenging—" "Be quiet," Dean yelled. "Where is this thing and why do I need it?" Good going, John," Abigail said in what I can assure you was a most sarcastic fashion. "Now you have to tell him." "All right," John said, sounding embarrassed and ashamed at having revealed something he should have kept to himself. "If you want to go any distance at all," he said to Dean, "you'll have to go to Papa's lab and get the charger to recharge the battery." "And now I suppose you're going to tell him it's on the main lab table," Abigail said. "Well," John suddenly brightened and became visibly, or apparently, happy. "It doesn't matter," he told his sister. "He doesn't even know where the lab is." "Of course I know where the lab is," Dean barked. I'm going to pause now and point out something that you may or may not have noticed. When John asked, "What about the battery charger?" you may, if you are quite clever, which is to say nearly as clever as I am, have suddenly thought, "Huh? Why is John helping Dean get away? Or had he made a mistake? After all, John tried, or seemed to try, to take it back and forget the whole thing. And you will also have noticed from the brilliant way I have described this scene that Professor Templeton himself was wondering this too. That is why his first answer to John's question was, or words to that effect. He was, as we say, stalling. Then you will have noticed that Abigail abruptly said things that not only supported what John had said, but added even more. She told John that he had to tell Dean what the charger was for. But why? Why did John have to reveal anything? Plus, you will have noticed that Abigail herself told Dean something, that the charger was on the main lab table. Why? Why would Abigail actually assist her brother in telling their enemy things he would need to know in order to escape? The answer, as you will see, is that Abigail realized what her brother had in mind, and she thought that his idea just might work. I don't expect you to know what that idea was. You would have to be even more intelligent than I am to be able to guess what John's scheme was, and I think the odds of that being the case are rather small, don't you? Thanks for the tip, kid, Dean shouted. I'm getting that charger and then I am gone. And he flew off over the trees. Quick, John said. Let's go. Wait, Abigail said. We need a plan. We don't have time to stand around thinking of a plan. We have to do something. John, we won't know what to do until we think of it first. Children, the professor said, you're both correct. But even if we had a plan, how could we go anywhere? He pointed to the metallic blue car. Dean has driven off with his car keys. Oh, John said. Right. Unless... The professor looked thoughtful and started walking toward the car. The Templeton twins traded a fast look. Then, because it didn't seem like a good idea to leave an actual gun lying around in the woods, John retrieved the actual gun. They ran after their father. Unless what? Abigail said. This is an old car, the professor said. I might be able to hotwire it. Now, Professor Templeton knew everything there was to know about engines and motors. If anyone could hotwire the car, I'm sorry, what? Is it possible you don't know what hotwiring a car means? How very disappointing. And yet, I know exactly what it means. Isn't that fascinating? To hotwire a car means to break into its controls and manipulate its wiring so that the car can be started without a key. You connect the starter to the ignition or the battery to the alternator or the what's-its to the thingy. Look, I don't know exactly how it works. All I know is you are able to start and drive the car without the key, all right? Good, John yelled. Do it, fast! It will be a pleasure, the professor said. Abby, get me that tire iron. Professor Templeton got behind the wheel of the metallic blue car, then whacked the steering column, which is the part of the car that holds up the steering wheel. A panel immediately fell off of the column, revealing all the wires and switches and things that made the car start. The professor took from his pocket the Swiss Army knife that he always carried, one of those red pocket knives that contain 5 or 10 or even 20, or more if you can believe it, different blades and tools. I'm sure you know what a Swiss Army knife is, but can you tell me, please, why the Swiss, who live in Switzerland, which is a tiny country with no enemies whatsoever, need to have an army? And why the army has to carry around a big, complicated knife full of screwdrivers and wine openers and nail files and scissors and Allen wrenches and toothpicks? No, you cannot. Let's move on. The professor pulled out some wires, cut into them, and tied them to each other, and in less than 15 seconds, the metallic blue car started with a loud, deep roar. The twins cheered and slapped their father on the back. Then John and Abigail got into the rear seat. Cassie got in next to the professor in the front. All the humans buckled their seatbelts. Cassie jumped into the professor's lap, and they drove briskly out of the woods. They reached the main highway and stopped. The professor looked in one direction and then the other. "I'm not quite sure where we are, children," he said. "Look," Abigail said. She pointed ahead of them and up. There, flying at about the level of the treetops, was Dean D. Dean in the personal one-man helicopter. "That way!" John cried. "Follow him!" Of course, it was impossible to literally follow Dean D. Dean since he was not following the highway. That's the point of a flying machine, you see. You don't have to stay on roads. But that didn't matter. As long as he was heading in the direction of the campus of Tick-Tock Tech, they knew which roads to follow. The professor hit the gas and they zoomed off. As they drove, he asked, "But why are we rushing? Shouldn't we stop and call the police?" "We don't have time," John said. It was a race between the Templeton twins and their father, and their ridiculous dog, and Dean D. Dean. The car had the advantage of being faster than the personal one-man helicopter, but the helicopter had the advantage of being able to go directly to its destination in a straight line, without turning from road to road, and, most important, without having to stop at stop signs and red lights. Neither John nor Abigail was sure they would make it. At one point, Abigail looked wildly around the dashboard of the car until she saw what she was looking for. The clock. It was broken. "Oh, Papa, what time is it?" she asked. The professor looked at his watch. "It's 12 minutes before 4, dear. Why?" Abigail looked at John. "We don't have much time," John said. "Papa, can you drive any faster?" The professor drove faster, and soon they arrived. They turned into the entrance of the campus, which was, as usual, deserted. They drove to Jerry Hall and parked in front just as Dean D. Dean floated into view. When he saw the metallic blue car waiting for him, he gave such a start that he almost dropped the controls and plunged to the ground. But he recovered and stopped, hovering about 60 feet in the air over the center of the main quad. "Go after him, Papa," John said. "Drive onto the grass." The professor hesitated. Is that truly necessary?" he asked. "Yes, please," Abigail said. "And then we have to get out and tell him we want to give him the papers." "Abby, for goodness sake, why would we want to do that?" "Oh, hurry, Papa. Drive out to where he is, before he gives up and just flies away." Professor Templeton made a look of doubt and confusion, then slowly drove the metallic blue car up and over the curb and onto the grass and down a small slope and out onto the big, broad, grassy field where Dean D. Dean remained hovering. I will now pause and permit you to guess what is going to happen next. I seriously doubt that you'll be able to do so. Moreover, if afterward you tell me that you were able to guess correctly what did in fact happen next, I simply will not believe you. Why should I? Nonetheless, now is your chance. Go on. Guess. Questions for review. Number 1, what do you think will happen next? Number 2, did you think of that yourself or did you have help? Number 3, why should I believe you?